This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. With part two of our report on this first anniversary of the assassination of the renowned Honduran environmental activist Berta Cáceres, killed in her home in La Esperanza just before midnight, March 2nd, 2016. Berta was co-founder of COPING, the Civic Council of Popular Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. In 2015, she won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize for her decade-long fight against the Agua Zarca Dam, a project planned along a river sacred to the indigenous Lenca people. Well, a new investigation has just come out in the Guardian newspaper that reveals further ties between Berta Cáceres' assassins, the Honduran military, intelligence, as well as the United States, a U.S.-trained elite force. Our guest right now is Nina Lakhani. She's the freelance journalist who wrote the piece in The Guardian, which is headlined, "Berta Cáceres Court Papers Show Murder Suspects Linked to U.S.-Trained Elite Troops." And she has been reporting on Honduras for years. Nina, thanks for joining us for part two of this discussion. You are highlighting this links to a U.S.-trained elite troops in Honduras. We ended part one by talking about why the Honduran government would want Berta Cáceres dead, the leading environmentalist of Honduras, well known also throughout the world. If you could pick it up from there.
Sure. I mean, Bertha was a major problem for the state. She wasn't going away. She had got, she had not just national but international attention for her campaign. You mentioned that she won the Goldman Prize, but she'd become, as a celebrated activist, not just in the Americas but in Europe, all over the world. And we now know that DESA, the company that has a concession to build the dam, the hydroelectric dam, we now know, that there are military, political, and business elites who sit on that board. The president of DESA is an ex-military intelligence officer and worked for the state electricity company. The vice president is an ex-justice minister. Another of the directors is the owner of one of Honduras's national banks. We know, really what we know from all the extractive industries in Honduras, that there is a revolving door of business, political and military elites, who have money, who have interest in these really, environmentally destructive projects. And she was a problem. She wasn't going away. Her campaign had got huge attention internationally. And so, that would be the reason, but I don't think, like I said earlier, is that, killing Bertha, it's highly improbable it would be the idea or would be planned by anyone at a low level. We have two people connected with the company currently accused. Bustillo, who was head of security until 2015, and Sergio Rodriguez, who was, mid-ranking. He was an engineer, mid-ranking. He was the communications and environmental manager, but who had nothing personally to gain. He doesn't have any neither of them have financial interest in the company. So that they would kill, organise and kill Bertha in what, is probably the highest profile murder to take place in Honduras in years, is just, to me, highly improbable. So
how is the investigation of Berta Cáceres' assassination going right now in Honduras? I mean, you have how many people arrested? 8?
The eight men arrested, like I say, 3 with military ties, 2 tied to the companies, and then, 2 were tied to the company. And then we have, 4 who were, I think, prosecutors believe, were hitmen, who were, low-level criminals working, and were hired to do that. I mean, I think, there's no doubt that some, at least, of the material authors are among that group have been arrested, but I think there's, the family are very concerned about procedural sort of errors and, procedural sort of inaccuracies or, things that haven't quite been right with the investigation. They've not been given information that they should be given, that even some of, they fear that even some of the material authors are likely to escape justice, that they haven't all been arrested, or that the case may not stand up in court against some of them. But I don't see any evidence. I haven't seen any evidence thus far that there's a strategy by prosecutors to look for the intellectual authors. You know, phone records show that, you know, that there was a hit being planned. You know, it's likely that a hit was being planned. There's phone records, messages between the three current and ex-military officers. But where was that money coming from? Whose idea was this? You know, there doesn't seem to be a strategy to look higher up. Who were the intellectual authors of this murder? Where did the evidence take us? You know, because the 8 men are currently in jail. I don't think there's evidence that suggests that the assassination and attempted murder of Gustavo Castro was planned by them.
The legislation that's been reintroduced by Congressman Johnson to cut U.S. military aid to Honduras, what effect would that have?
I mean, it's difficult to know. There's so much secrecy about what aid is spent on. You know, I mean, I think last year Congress approved $17 or $18 million for police and military aid. So, you know, it's difficult to know where, you know, what effect it would have, because I'm just not exactly sure on what the money is spent. For example, the special forces training that takes place, or the support, you know, that the US gives for special forces training. It's just, there's no information. It's classified, you know. There's no public information about how that money is spent, who the money is spent on, you know, what units, what exactly it goes to. So I think it's hard to know. I think, you know, certainly the U.S. Embassy in Honduras would say that, you know, what they're trying to do in support at the moment is the purging of the police, which has been, you know, for years linked to, you know, horrendous human rights violations, and they're working hard on that, you know. To withdraw it completely, you know, Honduras is a military, you know, it feels and smells like a militarized state. You know, and every year I go back, it feels more like that. You know, and so how much $18 million or extra money that we don't know about would make on that, I'm not really sure. You know, I mean, I think the argument from the US.
Finally, the issue of the number of environmental activists who've been killed in this last year in Honduras. What do you know about this, Nina?
Yes. Since Berta was murdered a year ago, at least 7 other activists and just specifically land and environment activists have been murdered. We know that. You know, a few days after she was killed, one of her coping colleagues, Nelson Garcia, was murdered. Other campesino leaders have been murdered, but 7 that we are absolutely sure have been, you know, who were you know, campaigners, activists working in the same area as Berta. So that's 124 that we know of since the 2009 military-backed coup. I mean, it's just, you know, it's an incredible number. You know, her murder has not stopped. The outrage and condemnation that followed her murder has not stopped the killing, because impunity reigns.
And finally, when you look at the links to this U.S.-trained elite force in Honduras, what do you think the U.S. has to account for now in its relationship with Honduras, even going back to her assassination, as you were the one who exposed the kill list with her at the top? Yeah.
The army deserter who is, you know, who I've been working with is absolutely adamant that on 2 specialist training courses, you know, which sound horrendous, you know, really tough training courses where he reports, you know, being tortured, suffering. You know, he was hospitalised, I think, 3 times during those after those training courses. That there were American trainers present. You know, that they were training the trainers almost. You know, there were American, Colombian, Panamanian trainers present in those training courses. And he was part of an elite force, you know. And I think just generally in terms of the special forces, I think, yes, I understand, you know, conditionality and, you know, having checks and balances in place regarding who gets training. It's a much wider, it's a bigger problem that, you know, these are systematic allegations of human rights violations against security forces in Honduras. Major Diaz has an absolutely pristine military record. There is nothing on his military record which would make him perfectly eligible for US training. And yet at the time of Berta's murder, he was studying to become a lieutenant colonel, at the same time that he was being investigated for drug trafficking and kidnap. You know, the system isn't working. Whatever checks and balances are in place it just isn't working. You know, it's a systematic problem. You know, human rights violations and extrajudicial killings. All really serious crimes are. You know, there is a systematic problem in the security forces, in the army, and in the police in Honduras. And I think, you know, trying to weed out bad apples is not effective. It doesn't work. These checks and balances are not working.
Well, Nina Lakhani, I want to thank you for being with us. We're going to end with the words of Berta Cáceres herself. Berta Cáceres, the leading environmental activist in Honduras, killed, assassinated a year ago.
No, claro que no. La población hoy.
The population today, those who've been in resistance or are from the Libre Party, are challenging the repressive apparatus, with the absence of the construction of real power from the communities. But now, these people are voting enthusiastically for the Libre Party that we hope will be distinct from the other political parties. This scenario is playing out in all the regions of Honduras, in Zacate Grande, Garifuna communities, campesino sectors, women, feminists, artists, journalists, and indigenous communities. We all know how these people have been hard hit, especially the journalists, LGBTQ community, and indigenous communities. This is all part of what they've done to create a climate of fear. Here, there's a policy of the state to instill terror and political persecution. This is to punish the Honduran people so that people don't opt for the other way and look for changes to the political economic situation and the militarization.
Those are the words of Berta Cáceres, murdered, assassinated in her own home a year ago. Our guest has been Nina Lakhani, freelance journalist whose recent piece for The Guardian is Berta Cáceres' court papers show murder suspects' links to U.S.-trained elite troops. We'll link to it at democracynow.org. To see part one of our conversation, go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.